Hello everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a Hometown Scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. Tonight's story, The Chinese Affair. Hello there. We've gone back into the scrapbook tonight, way back to bring out a story that some of the old timers aren't too proud of. But it's a story that I think belongs here, along with the rest, as part of the picture of Grays Harbor way back in its sawdust days. It's a story that couldn't happen today. That is, we hope it couldn't happen today in an enlightened America. But it happened not so long ago in Europe, in a little different way. And it's not peculiar to Grays Harbor, because it happened at a good many points along the Pacific coast about the same time. And in one form or another, it has happened at almost every interval in the world at some time. Now that's a long dodge to go through. But I want to make it clear that while it's a colorful part of the rough and ready west of Grays Harbor's early days, the air of tragedy about it was very real, and the discomfort of its participants was probably comparable to some of the human miseries that we make public speeches about today. But that's the story, and tonight we're going to tell you a yarn that's cataloged in the Hometown Scrapbook as the Oriental Affair. But first, let's have a few words from Dick Crombie and our sponsors. The towns of Grays Harbor were pretty young when the first batch of Orientals arrived in the canneries. These Chinese, brought to the United States by fishing interest and herded about from one low-paying job to another. They were about the last of the migration that had started with Chinese brought to America to work as laborers on the eastbound transcontinental railroads, to do rough work in early San Francisco and the California mining camps. And when they came to Grays Harbor, they settled down here, forming a little colony, a small selection of ancient Carthay in Aberdeen's waterfront. They were law-abiding people who only asked to be permitted to live here and make a thin livelihood from the cannery jobs, restaurants, and laundries. Most of them lived together in a big old building on River Street, not far from where the Stouffer Bowman Company offices are located today. And like most foreign folk in a faraway land, they had a leader and a spokesman. The head man, and one of the best known to Grays Harbor folk, was John Wing. John was a handsome man in an Oriental way, and when he was dressed in his best black silk kimono and a new pair of glass sandals, his well-oiled queue tailing down his broad back neck, its end tied with a bright blue ribbon, he would have made a treat for the eyes of an Oriental lady. But John was not a Mandarin lady killer. He was a laundryman by profession, and particularly all of the soiled linen not tied up in the tubs of local housewives found its way to John Wing's laundry and was thumped, paddled, and hand-wrung clean by many pairs of Oriental hands working together. The old building that housed his laundry was the same one that served as a residence for the Oriental settlement, and except for a small front office where call customers dropped off or picked up their packages of freshly starched linens, or to leave a bundle of soiled things, the rest of the building was a mystery to Grays Harbor. Of course, there were many strange stories that went on behind its unpainted walls, and at most any hour of the night, passerbys would see the busy little men ironing the wrinkles out of a pioneer's linens, which led to reports that none ever slept there, and that John Wing worked them night and day for pennies. One of the few members of John's staff who sailed forth to see the town was a tall, stooped water-carrying who shuffled back and forth between the laundry and the town waterspout, located on the corner of Human Eye Street, where a board cedar long pipe brought fresh water up the hill down to the town's housewives for them to fill their buckets in the morning, and passed along the night's accumulation of gossip. Carrying 2 5-gallon cans at the end of poles slung over his shoulder, the water boy walked with a sliding gait that balanced the cans perfectly, and the folks marveled at how he could amble his way along without spilling a drop. Now John Wing established his credit with the merchants of the town, and by his fair dealings made himself welcome anywhere he went. He did not intrude on Occidental homes. Under no circumstances could he be called forward. His close friend was a fellow countryman who opened a restaurant on Lower F Street and sold a sideline of Chinese medicines. And except for the business calls, which John always treated with the greatest formality, and his social calls on his friend, John Wing kept to himself. Although there were probably not more than 20 Chinese on Grace Harbor in 1890. And when the canning season came along and the salmon run, filling the packing house with the silver hoard, others came in to take the cannery jobs. They would work for less than the white people and would work longer hours. They put more dollars of profit into the pockets of the packing house operators. But when men along the waterfront talked earnestly about losing their jobs to cheap Oriental labor, they never mentioned the cannery men who brought in cheap labor, but the Orientals who stayed on after the cannery season was over. Each year, there were a few more. It was not only on Grace Harbor, but all along the coast, that the Orientals and soapbox orators were raising the issue of cheap Asian labor, competing with American labor. They're lowering our standard of living, shouted the orators and blasted in the irate editors. San Francisco quells several riots that broke out in their Chinatown. Portland and Seattle had trouble, Seattle ending in a riot with gunplay. Then one night, a self-appointed citizens committee called a meeting in the back room of a local bicycle shop. They had announced the purpose of the meeting, and everyone had plenty of time to think it over before he showed up at the appointed place. The chairman came straight to the point. We can't build a community here with our workmen competing with cheap Asian labor, he declared. He asked for a decision on the subject, and when the agreement appeared unanimous, he proposed the plan. We'll give John Wing his walking papers, he announced. Several of us will talk with John so that he knows we mean business. If he doesn't leave, we'll do something drastic. It was late in October 1890 when the vigilante committee called on John at his laundry and laid down a decree. He had 48 hours to pack up and get out of town, John and all his fellow countrymen. When they walked away from the big, dark building on River Street, the committee was well satisfied with itself that they had stated their case plainly, and John had given to the understanding that they would accept no alternative. They had been firm. John, they were sure, would go. But the next morning, business at the laundry continued as usual. The water boy, in his short brown pants and coarse shirt, shuffled to the water spout and back again, carrying his brimming buckets. The laundry took in new work and delivered several bundles of finished washing to the customers. John Wing made the trip down on F Street to his friend's restaurant and spent some time in the kitchen talking with him. When 48 hours had passed, things were going as usual at John Wing's, and that night the committee met again. America for Americans was the war cry that night, and after some of the more rabid members had been talked down, the members who wanted to form a lynching party, the more conservative leaders, decided that perhaps John had not understood their ultimatum. They decided to print a warning and post it on his door. The committee composed a sheet headed "Second Warning," a printed copy on the hand press in sufficient quantities to take care of every door in John's building, as well as the front and back doors of the F Street restaurant. They nailed them mostly to the doors late at night and then waited for action. But things went on as usual. The notices came down and John went about his business. Sailors from ships in the harbor ate ham and eggs at the F Street restaurant, and John Wing took in more soiled laundry at his front office. But that week the newspaper printed a bitter and direct statement of the most radical opinion on Asian labor. It sounded like an edict to the vigilantes, and on the evening of the 7th of November 1890 they met again in the bicycle shop. The chairman laid a prevailer on the table before him and announced that this night would be the right night. "We'll take things into our own hands tonight," he said, and in a few minutes later the meeting broke up as the members went home for their shooting irons. While the vigilantes armed themselves, the committee arranged to have the stern wheel steamer Wish God Chief at the boat landing at the foot of the Heron Street at 2:30. It was to have its steam up and ready to go. A slab cart was borrowed and driven to the alley behind the meeting place, and behind the bicycle shop at midnight the committee assembled its members. There was little oratory now. One of the members of the committee once confessed that he lost heart for the venture when they assembled in the alley that night, but it was too late to turn back, and when their full number was there, around 20, they followed their leader down to G Street to John Wing's laundry. They gathered in the black November night in front of the barny old building, and they hammered noisily with their pistol butts on the door. It was to be repeated several times before the door opened and John Wing stood there. No one ever told me what they said to John, but it made it clear to the laundromat that this was time for him to go. They gave him time to pack some boxes and bundles together, then throw them into the slab cart, and John and his workmen hurried before the committee towards F Street and the waterfront. The procedure was repeated at the restaurant, and two luckless Asians trying to hide in the kitchen were turned out by the gunmen, one of them to be carried out bodily, and they were all hustled into the slab cart, now reinforced by a second, with their belongings, and were all trundled to the foot of the Heron Street and waiting Wishkah Chief. When all of the Asians had been marched aboard the boat and their possessions thrown onto the deck, the Wishkah Chief took the signal from the leader of the committee, and the stern wheel threshed the water and backed away from the landing to disappear into the night in the direction of Montesano. The committee, going home, stopped for a moment at Bob Waldron's saloon nearby. "There'll be no laundry done tomorrow in Aberdeen," they told the late keeping barman. Well, the city, which had no official part in this action, awakened the next morning to see the strange sight. A mountain of laundry was piled against the wall of the city jail on G Street. It was taken in custody of Marshal Joe Graham, who held it for identification of its owners. The door of John Wing's laundry bore a strange Asian character in yellow chalk. Those who knew the custom of them declared it to be a sign of an evil spirit cursing the community that has driven them out. That was not at all. From newspapers of other publications over the Northwest came comments on Grays Harbor's Oriental affair. Some praised the citizens who sought to make the Northwestern an America for America. One editor saw the melodrama stark and awesome. 12 long miles over the rushing waters of the Black Chehalis, with nothing between them and its cold, uninviting depths, save the deck of the Wishkah Chief, he wrote. Nothing to break the midnight gloom of the surrounding but the flickering lights of the steamer and the twinkling of the pitying stars above. And to add to their misery, not one morsel of food nor one drop of water. Was there ever such cruelty? It is out of the czar of the meetings, that make it call us the very devil itself to call us Americans. Tears sufficient to have quenched the fires of Hades. Words fail when I think of poor John Wing, the editor wrote. Yet surely he must congratulate himself in having escaped a people so cruel. That was the feeling of many on the harbor that night. Now, Dick, a few words from our sponsor. Well, that was it. the Oriental affair as it was told to me by one who was there. Some residents never mentioned their part in the Oriental affair in all those years since they have lived here in the harbor. Others left the harbor soon afterwards, but a few, very few, told of their part in the vigilant work with pride and bravado. That is, they did until there was some talk of criminal prosecution for taking the law into their own hands. And then, for years, nothing more was said about the affair firsthand until some men nearing the end of their span of life told just enough of the story to chronicle it in local history and to give us the story we find tonight in our hometown scrapbook. Thanks for listening.